Last question I want to ask you. You said masculinity is more feminine than femininity.
More fragile.
More fragile, sorry. Masculinity more fragile than femininity throughout time. Can you go into describe that?
Yeah, when you talk about fragile masculinity, it sounds like a slur, right? It sounds like a bit of an eye-rolling thing that actually some people would say from the other side of the argument. What I mean by that is the construction of masculinity, and especially mature masculinity, it's just a bit more social. It's a more of a cultural task. It doesn't come quite as naturally, because we don't have quite the same sort of obvious reproductive markers, right, as women. And that's why I think societies have very often had to work quite hard to have certain rites of passage, to have certain ways of learning around what it means to go from boy to man. And so what I mean by the sense it's more fragile is that it is more socially constructed, that it's more of a task for a culture and for a society to figure out how we're going to help boys to become men, how we're going to teach them what it means to be a good and a mature man. I don't think it comes quite as naturally as it does for women. Now, it's not to say there aren't social constructions around femininity as well, but I think masculinity is more of a cultural task than femininity is, which is why I don't think you very often hear about a crisis of femininity.
I've written about exactly this too. It's this idea really since the time of the sexual revolution when women start to become more independent. That's when guys start saying, "Well, should I be macho? Should I not be macho?
How should I be?
How should I be?" Kind of thing. We're at a point right now. I think here we are, like almost 60 years later, where guys of certainly the last 2 generations, if not the last 4. Are not necessarily questioning their masculinity or having it questioned all the time. It's they're self-loathing when it comes to that. It's bad to be a man. Which was not boys will be boys. Boys will be good humans, right? Or else it's I don't know what masculinity is, so it's subjective, and I'll create it for myself. Rather than having some sort of concrete, we would not be having this conversation in a pre-sexual revolution society in the 50s or 40s. That's why we keep hearkening back to those times, because that's the only point we can remember.
It wasn't a question.
Like your grandfather would not have this conversations. What is a man? What is a woman? That would be simply self-evident. But now I think really as women have become more masculinized and have become more independent of men, what that's done is it's opened up opportunities for sort of exploiting this uncertainty of generations of men as, well, what is a man? Well, a real man does X. A real man does this. And whatever X is tends to be the pet ideology of whoever has that interest in convincing that guys, toxic masculinity is this, but real men do this. So and whatever this is usually representative of what that ideology is.
Yeah, and I agree with the fact that there's this period of flux and uncertainty, and we're asking questions about what does it mean to be a man. By the way, women too. I mean, it was true. My grandmother didn't have to. Really
they didn't have to ask that question.
But it's the same for like a lot of women now, kind of figuring out like, I know how to be a woman. And what we've done is we've expanded the range of ways that we can be masculine and can be feminine, and the roles we can play. And that is both a wonderful thing and a very challenging thing. Obviously, the world's much easier when society just tells you how to be.
Yeah.
Right, and all you've got to do is follow orders. That's very easy. It's very hard to be in a society where, oh wait, there's 1,000 ways to do this. Crikey, that's hard. But what we shouldn't do is just abandon people to that. What we shouldn't do is say, okay, fine, good luck figuring this out. We should be helping them figure it out. And I think the key thing is not to throw out the very idea of masculinity just because we're expanding it and giving it more choice. And potentially, this is a really wonderful thing that we're having here. I know we've focused on the crisis, and there's lots of really difficult things going on, but potentially this could be great. It could be wonderful going forward to say, you don't have to stop being a guy, you don't have to stop being masculine, but look at all these different things you can do now, these different ways you can be masculine. I was able to stay at home and care for my kids. That was not something that my dad had as an option. I'd still consider myself to be a guy, and I think I probably parented slightly differently, but what a wonderful world it is that allowed me to be that kind of guy as well as this kind of guy.
I would argue that also, and I know we're out of time, but I would also argue this. We were talking about teachers a little while ago, and there's a definite deficit in teachers. It's in the UK, Canada, and the United States right now. 77% of your teachers today, from preschool all the way to post-secondary, will be females.
Yes.
In the United States, 70. It's higher in other countries, actually.
Yes.
And so because those jobs are not, men don't see teaching as a career path because they tend to be low paying, and there's very little status involved in all of that. So it's like they're not going to be selected because they're teachers. It's better to be a professional athlete or a rock star or whatever it is than it is to be a teacher. And so those the idea of, well, we can play these different roles now as guys, and we've got this, I can be Mr. Mom or whatever else. The problem is with those roles is that it doesn't eliminate the biological proclivities of men and women to think that, well, if I'm a teacher, it'd be great and a noble cause, and it's a noble profession, but I'm only going to make $45,000 a year, and I'm never going to be able to get with the hot girls that he's at Zook. That's a kind of whether that's a cognitive recognition or not, but
it's not conscious.
So those new roles that are opening up conflict with our old evolutionary firmware, I guess. Maybe that's a better way.
Well, they don't have to, though. I mean, you take teaching as an example, and I think I'm a bit obsessed with that. We need more men in our classrooms, for sure.
I think we do, actually.
But in 1980, 40% of elementary and middle school teachers were male. Now it's 20%. So it's become a female profession. It didn't used to be. It used to be a perfectly honorable thing for guys to do.
Yeah, because we think they're all going to be kitty touchers.
Whatever the reason is.
And you brought up that men or that boys tend to do better in subjects they struggle at when they have
English.
male teachers.
Like English.
And that women actually do the same. They do
STEM.
better in STEM when they have female teachers.
I think that's a huge reason. But also the other reason to have more male teachers is they're more likely to be coaches after school and so on too. And I just think that idea that we should have institutions generally where there are representatives of both sexes, right? So we want more female members of Congress, and we want more male elementary school teachers, don't we?
Sure.
So that our boys see men teaching, including things like English, and our girls see women passing laws, right? That's the future we want.
Do you think it would be more impressive to have a woman working in construction or raw sewage or something? That's a longshoreman kind of thing. Would that be more impressive than, say, a woman who goes to Congress? Because we still have a deficit in those jobs, because women don't choose to become, sanitation workers. Okay, no. They choose to be I want to get into a higher.
Well, I don't blame them.
Yeah, I don't either. But the thing is if we're going to talk about, we need to see more men in this, and we need to see more.
Well, you could say the same thing about healthcare assistants, care home, pretty poorly paid. Those are almost all women.
Well, I think it's interesting that we demonize, and I'm gonna give you a point here. I think it's interesting that we demonize, say, major universities and say they're going to be these feminist indoctrination camps and everything else, but yet we still pay those teachers so low that I'm pretty sure socialism looks like a pretty damn good deal to people who are in those institutions, because we don't take care of those teachers. We don't value them enough. If you want to put more men into teaching positions, you've got to make it more appealing. Got to incentivize it, and it will never until we incentivize those things. It's going to.
But we knew that too. We had to incentivize. We had to help women get into traditionally male roles with scholarships and so on too. So we should do the same. We need a massive recruitment drive of men into our schools, especially to teach subjects like English, because if they don't see men in those institutions, they're not around men, they don't have male teachers showing them, to some extent, just performing masculinity, just showing what it means to be a guy. Back to this point about Andrew Tate, right? If you have a boy, say, who maybe has lost touch with his father, maybe there aren't very many men in his community, maybe he doesn't go to church, or there aren't school, groups around, then he goes to school where there are no male teachers, no male coaches. It's perfectly possible that he could get sort of close to adolescence and not have had any strong male role models in his life. There is nobody that thinks that's a good idea. Nobody. And so one thing we can do about that from a policy point of view is let's at least get more men into our classrooms.
Yeah. Awesome. Let's do super chats.